He sat in 2A, hands folded, shoes polished, calm as the morning sky. He had a ticket, he had the right, but he didn't have the color they expected. "You need to move," the flight attendant said, loud enough for Rose to hear. No questions, no scans, just judgment. He didn't argue. He just made a call. 7 minutes later, the door opened again. Not for security, but for someone more powerful than the policy they abused. What happened next didn't just reclaim one seat. It rewrote the rules of who gets to sit where and why. The hum of the aircraft's ventilation system was steady, soft, almost calming. Noah Franklin sat upright in seat 2A, his posture impeccable, his dark brown hands folded gently in his lap. At just 11 years old, he wore his navy blazer and gray slacks like they were armor, every crease pressed, every button aligned. His black leather shoes shined under the cabin lights. There was nothing about him out of place, nothing loud or disruptive, except, it seemed, his presence. Samantha Green, the lead flight attendant, approached from the galley, a tight smile across her face and a clipboard in her hand. She stopped beside his seat, her shadow falling over him like a curtain drawn closed. "Excuse me, sweetheart," she began, voice syrupy but taut. "This is first class. Are you sure you're in the right seat?" Noah looked up slowly, calm, unbothered. "Yes, ma'am. It's on my boarding pass, 2A. He reached into his blazer and presented the pass without hesitation. It was pristine, printed from a private terminal kiosk with a small gold V watermark next to the seat number, an indicator reserved for VIP protocol. But Samantha didn't even glance at it. "That can't be right," she said, her tone shifting, firmer. "Unaccompanied minors usually sit in economy or the first row by the crew. I think there's been a mistake." She didn't wait for Noah's reply. Her eyes scanned the cabin for an open seat elsewhere, preferably one further back. A few passengers across the aisle raised their eyebrows, sensing something unfolding. Row 2C's occupant, an older Latina woman with silver-streaked hair and a silk scarf, watched in stillness. "I'm sorry," Noah said quietly, but clearly. "My dad booked this seat. The VIP desk confirmed it. I'm fine to sit here." Samantha's jaw clenched, the forced smile fading. "We'll have to reassign you, just to be safe. Come on, let's not cause a scene." "I'm not causing a scene," Noah replied. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't flinch. "I'm just sitting." The moment hung in the air like fog on the runway. Then Samantha leaned slightly toward him, lowering her voice, but not her authority. "You're making some of the other passengers uncomfortable, okay? This is just policy." It was a lie, and Noah knew it. The airline had cleared him. His father had made sure of it, but policy was a perfect disguise for prejudice. It always had been. From behind, another passenger shifted uncomfortably. No one spoke. The woman in 2C looked from Samantha to Noah, then back again. She opened her mouth as if to intervene, then closed it. Her hand tightened around her purse. Samantha tapped her earpiece. "I need a gate agent to first class. I've got a passenger sitting in the wrong seat. He's unaccompanied." Noah's stomach didn't lurch. His face didn't drop. He just blinked once, folded the boarding pass back into his pocket, and looked out the window. The tarmac was bright with morning sun. Aircraft tails lined like flags in salute. But the warmth outside didn't reach inside. Several rows back, murmurs stirred. A middle-aged man in a business suit furrowed his brow. A young woman in 1D raised her phone slightly, as if thinking to record, but then lowered it again. A minute passed, then 2. The gate agent arrived. Erica Williams, barely 30, sharp in her uniform and alert. As she stepped into the cabin and saw Noah, her expression shifted. Recognition flickered in her eyes. She had seen his name on the VIP manifest. Samantha turned toward her. "We've got a child sitting in first class. He's alone, probably a seat assignment error." Erica extended her hand calmly. "Let me verify his ticket." Noah handed it over again. Erica scanned it, then looked at her tablet. The information came up immediately. Noah Franklin, Seat 2A, VIP clearance. High priority status. Special authorization noted. Executive protocol exception. Franklin, Elijah. She nodded. He's in the correct seat. Samantha's face didn't change, but her nostrils flared just slightly. Still, minors don't usually sit in this section. Erica kept her tone even. This one was cleared by executive operations. Everything's valid. Samantha didn't respond. She turned to adjust the seatbelt in 2B, pretending not to hear. Erica handed the ticket back to Noah. "You're good here," she said with a small nod. "Thank you," Noah replied. But just then, another voice cut through the cabin. "Let's not delay the flight over this," said Brian Walker, the first officer, who had appeared at the galley curtain. He looked at Erica, then at Samantha. "Just move him back. We'll sort it out later." Samantha looked vindicated. Erica's mouth opened to object, but she hesitated. The hierarchy on the tarmac was brutal and clear, and she wasn't at the top. Noah rose from his seat without another word. He picked up his backpack, checked the zipper, and turned to Erica. "Can you tell my dad?" he asked. Erica blinked, unsure. Sure." Noah nodded once. "He'll want to know." Then he walked down the aisle, alone. No tantrum, no protest, just quiet, like fog pulling away from the glass. He sat down in the last emergency exit row, the one next to the wing, a seat built for adults. A seat not made for boys like him. Back in 2C, the woman with the scarf, Rosa Delgado, whispered to no one in particular. He had a ticket, a real one. But no one answered. Noah sat still in the emergency exit row, his back straight against the firm leather seat. The hum of the engines hadn't yet started, but the silence around him felt louder than anything mechanical. He didn't fidget. He didn't sigh. He just stared at the seat back in front of him, the tray table folded, the safety card tucked tight. The space felt colder here, like dignity had lost altitude on its way through the aisle. Meanwhile, at the front of the plane, Samantha Green adjusted a headrest in row 3 with exaggerated focus, pretending not to notice the tension still lingering in the cabin. She glanced back once, just once, toward where Noah had been seated, then shifted her eyes forward again as if erasing the memory. Rosa Delgado sat quietly in 2C, her scarf now clutched between her fingers. She looked around the cabin, hoping someone else had seen what she had, hoping someone would speak. But everyone wore the same mask of neutral disinterest. A man in 3A stared at his phone. A couple in 1D and 1E whispered but avoided eye contact. "Just a misunderstanding," Samantha had said earlier. "Policy." But Rosa had seen the boarding pass. She had seen the composure of the boy. What she hadn't seen was any reason for him to be removed, except the look on Samantha's face the moment she first laid eyes on him. Down the aisle, Erica Williams stood just inside the galley, biting the inside of her cheek. The scan had been clear. The override from executive operations had been there. She knew that name, Elijah Franklin. The same Elijah Franklin who had helped build the industry's ethical oversight program. And now, his son had just been dismissed like an error in the seating chart. Erica tapped her tablet again. The record was unchanged. VIP status confirmed. Notes in the system flagged Noah as a priority minor with direct authorization. There had been no breach of policy. The only thing broken here was the assumption that a boy like him could belong in a seat like 2A. "I should have said more," she murmured to herself. Further back, Noah finally moved, not to speak, not to make a scene, but to reach into his blazer and take out his phone. He unlocked it with a swipe, scrolled to the first contact, and hit call. It rang once, twice, then connected. "Dad," he said quietly, "it's happening again." No further explanation was needed. On the other end, Elijah Franklin's voice didn't rise. He didn't curse. He just said, "Okay, stay where you are. I'll handle it." As Noah ended the call, a soft chime echoed above, a seatbelt reminder flickering on. He leaned back slightly, eyes on the light. Across the aisle, a teenage boy glanced at him, smirked. then turned back to his earbuds. Noah ignored him. Up front, Samantha approached Brian Walker at the cockpit curtain. "It's been handled," she said, casually. Brian nodded. "We'll note it as a seating adjustment due to unaccompanied status. Just check the manifest again." "Already done," she replied, though it was a length. Brian didn't push. He didn't want delays. First officer wasn't a role that enjoyed conflict, especially not ones involving accusations you couldn't afford to admit aloud. But one person did push, quietly, behind a screen. In seat 3B, a man in his late 30s had his phone tilted subtly against the window. He had started recording the moment Samantha raised her voice, the moment she dismissed the boarding pass without reading it, the moment Erica's scan confirmed the seat, and it was still ignored. The camera didn't shake. The angle wasn't perfect, but the audio was crystal clear. He hadn't meant to film, not at first, but something about the way the boy held himself, the calm in his voice, and the cold certainty in hers. It stirred something. He was a journalist, not one of the flashy cable news types. He worked for an ethics blog. Low-key, high integrity. He believed in letting stories unfold without forcing a headline. And now, in his hands, one was unfolding. He tapped Save and labeled the file. Franklin Incident, Flight 307. Then he looked around, making sure no one had noticed. They hadn't. Most eyes were on devices, pages, or simply staring forward, waiting for the flight to leave the gate. But it hadn't. The delay wasn't long, maybe 10 minutes, but it was enough. Enough for whispers to turn to murmurs. Enough for Noah's name to be passed quietly from Erica to another agent near the terminal, then to a supervisor standing just outside the jet bridge. Inside the cockpit, Brian exhaled and tapped the intercom. "Cabin crew, prepare for departure." His voice was even, rehearsed. But just as the chime sounded, a message popped up on his dashboard screen. "Hold for incoming clearance." He frowned. At the same moment, Erica's phone buzzed in her pocket. A message from gate security. The Franklin family had been flagged for immediate VIP intervention. Her fingers tightened on the tablet. This was no longer a seating issue. This was a reckoning on the verge of arrival. Down in the seat near the wing, Noah tucked his phone away and looked out at the tarmac. He wasn't angry. He wasn't even surprised. He had seen this before, at restaurants, at hotel check-ins, even once at school. But something about today felt different. Today, he wasn't with his father. And yet, he felt him moving through the system like a wave. Quiet, unstoppable, and coming fast. Back in 2C, Rosa Delgado reached into her purse and pulled out a small notepad. She began writing. Not a complaint, not a report, just what she saw, word for word. She had been quiet too long in her life, she thought. Maybe it was time to change that. The seat beside the emergency exit was stiff and cold. Noah Franklin adjusted his backpack under the seat, folding his jacket across his lap. His hands were still, not clenched, just still. He didn't look around. He didn't fidget. But the shift in cabin air was tangible, like the silence after a dropped plate in a restaurant. Something had happened. Something loud. Even though no one had raised their voice, from where he sat, the view through the window was blocked by the wing. All he could see was the riveted steel, broad and motionless. A false horizon. Passengers continued boarding. Their eyes drifted toward him, then away. Some curious, some indifferent. One man in 16A gave him a long look, the kind that lasted just a second too long. Noah didn't meet his eyes. He exhaled slowly and pressed a button on his phone. One ring, two. "Dad," he said, voice barely a whisper. "It's happening again." There was a pause, then the sound of breathing on the other end. Calm, measured. "Stay seated, don't move, I'll handle it." Noah didn't respond. He just nodded to no one and ended the call. His father's voice had always been enough. Not loud, not rushed, but solid. Like a foundation under his feet. That was all he needed. Across the aisle, A young woman with a baby in her arms rocked gently, humming to soothe her child. She glanced at Noah once, her expression unreadable. Then she turned away. Life moved on, as if nothing had happened. But something had, and it was still unfolding, one quiet detail at a time. Back near the front of the plane, Erica Williams stood just outside the cockpit curtain, her tablet still in hand. She tapped the screen again, eyes narrowing. Something wasn't right. Noah Franklin, first class, seat 2A, VIP designation, override clearance, FEB. She tapped to expand the profile. Issuing authority, Federal Ethics Board, authorized by Franklin, Elijah. Her stomach turned slightly. Elijah Franklin wasn't just any VIP. He was one of the federal appointees behind the Passenger Equity Act, a measure designed to protect passengers from discrimination and arbitrary treatment during domestic travel. His name was etched in policies the airline supposedly trained on every quarter, and his son had just been removed from his assigned seat. Erica looked toward the back of the plane, trying to spot Noah, but the rows blocked her view. Still, she could feel the weight of the decision Samantha had made, and she knew it wasn't about the seat. It never was. Her thoughts were interrupted by a message flashing across her tablet. Hold clearance. Do not close cabin. Awaiting VIP directive. She blinked. VIP directive. Another agent had flagged Noah's profile, she realized. Someone on the outside had picked up the signal. Her phone buzzed. A text from a colleague working the desk near Gate 3. Did you see who the kid is? We might have a situation. Erica typed back quickly. I saw. And yeah, we already do. She stepped back into the jet bridge, heart steady but quickening. She didn't need to ask permission. Not now. She dialed the number listed under the emergency executive contact field. The line picked up on the first ring. This is Franklin, a deep voice answered. Mr. Franklin, Erica said, professional but low. This is Erica Williams, gate staff. I just wanted you to know your son's boarding record was valid. He had seat 2A. We confirmed it. I don't know why they moved him. There was a pause. You did your job, Elijah said calmly. Now I'll do mine. The call ended. Erica exhaled, her hand still on the phone. Her other hand gripped the tablet as though it might fall. She looked back toward the aircraft, toward the quiet stillness inside, and whispered to herself, this isn't going away. Inside the cabin, Brian Walker had resumed his spot near the cockpit, flipping through the flight manifest. He looked relaxed, maybe even a little smug. He hadn't questioned Samantha's judgment. He hadn't checked the system. He hadn't needed to. As far as he was concerned, the problem was resolved. But in row 16, Noah hadn't moved an inch. His phone rested face down on the tray table. He looked ahead. He looked calm. But inside, his mind ran like a current. Not angry, just exact. Last time, the flight from Atlanta to Miami. The same thing had happened, only he'd been with his mother then. They'd both been dressed well, ticketed properly, but they were asked to verify again and again. Are you sure this is your seat? The attendant had asked his mother. Are you sure? Like she didn't belong in the answer. He had cried that time, quiet tears, small fists. This time, he didn't cry. He remembered. A few rows behind, a boy a little older than him leaned out into the aisle, stared, then leaned back with a smirk. Noah didn't flinch. In seat 2C, Rosa Delgado still hadn't opened her magazine. Her hands were folded over her purse, and her mind kept replaying the moment Samantha had ignored the boarding pass, had turned without reading, had smiled that smile that never reached her eyes. This wasn't policy. This was perception disguised as policy. And now, something had been set in motion. The fluorescent lights of the jet bridge flickered overhead as Erica Williams stood with her back against the wall, fingers flying across her tablet. She wasn't nervous, not yet, but she was alert. Every keystroke she tapped tightened a loop she couldn't untangle, not without consequence. She had worked for Liberty Wings for 6 years, long enough to understand the chain of command, long enough to know when someone had crossed a line that wasn't meant to be crossed. But this wasn't just a line. It was a minefield, and Samantha Green had just stomped through it like it didn't exist. Erica pulled up the manifest again. Noah Franklin, Seat 2A, age 11, status VIP clearance override, authorized by Franklin, Elijah. Then she opened a secondary panel, an internal directory only accessible by gate leads and senior agents. Her credentials gave her just enough access. She tapped the name, Franklin, Elijah. Title, Chairman, Federal Ethics Board, Department of Transportation. Past roles, Senior Ethics Counsel, Joint Congressional Oversight Committee. Co-author of the Passenger Equity and Fair Access Act. National Consultant on Discrimination Response Protocols in Commercial Aviation. Her heart skipped once, then steadied. This wasn't just a father. This wasn't just a CEO. This was the man who had written the very rulebook Liberty Wings claimed to follow. And now, his son had been forcibly removed from a paid, confirmed, executive-cleared seat by someone who hadn't even checked the system. Erica bit the inside of her cheek. She looked up and around the gate. The waiting area was thinning. A few stragglers lined up at nearby counters. A security officer sipped coffee beside a pillar, oblivious. And over at Gate 4, a man in a sleek navy suit stood watching her. At first, she didn't notice him. He blended in, the way polished people often do. But when their eyes met, something in his gaze sharpened. He walked toward her, not rushed, not aggressive, just purposeful. He wore no name badge, no flight credentials, but his lanyard carried a silver laminate card, the kind only seen at quarterly executive briefings. "Agent Williams," he said. Not a question, a statement. She hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, sir." He extended a hand. "Miles Everett, Strategic Operations Director." Her fingers paused mid-air before shaking his. "I understand you flagged a situation," he continued. "With a passenger." She kept her face neutral. "I followed protocols, sir. The passenger in question had a valid first-class ticket, cleared by executive override. He was reassigned without cause." Miles nodded slowly, eyes unreadable. "Unaccompanied minor?" "Yes, but the override was specific. Exception granted by Elijah Franklin." There it was. His expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes flickered. A recognition she hadn't expected. Not panic, not concern. Calculation. "We appreciate your diligence," he said smoothly. "I'll escalate internally. You're dismissed from further involvement." She blinked. "Excuse me?" "No need for additional notes," he added. "We'll be handling it through central channels now." Translation: "Stop digging." Erica didn't move. "Sir, with respect, I was the one who verified the record. I spoke directly with Mr. Franklin." That made him pause. "You spoke with him?" "Yes. I wanted him to know the removal wasn't initiated by gate personnel. We confirmed his son's seat." Miles exhaled slowly, then stepped slightly closer. "Erica, I'm going to speak candidly. Elijah Franklin is not someone we want to antagonize. This could become a legal firestorm. But if we keep it contained, it doesn't have to." "Contained," she echoed, tone flat. "You're a good agent," he said gently now. "Don't jeopardize your trajectory over one misunderstanding." The warning was smooth, polite, lethal. She didn't answer. Miles gave a professional nod and walked off, already pulling out his phone. Erica watched him go, blood pounding in her ears. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a decision, a targeted one. And now someone was trying to cover it before it reached the surface. She turned back to her tablet, fingers trembling slightly. Inside the cabin, Samantha was pouring sparkling water into a plastic cup for a passenger in row 1B, her posture poised, her smile tight. Brian Walker leaned against the cockpit frame, chatting with a crew member as if nothing had happened. Noah still sat in the emergency row, staring straight ahead, unmoving. They thought it was over. They thought the quiet meant safety. Erica pressed the Share Incident button on her tablet. Not through internal comms, but directly to the airline's independent ethics auditor, a protocol she'd only used once before. She included the video file from the internal camera mounted above 2A, time-stamped to Noah's removal. She added her own memo. Passenger removed despite valid override. Suspected bias. Attempted suppression by internal leadership. Then she hit send. No turning back. 10 rows behind the cockpit, Rosa Delgado closed her notebook and tucked it into her handbag. She didn't know Erica. She didn't know Elijah Franklin. But she knew silence. She'd lived with it too long, and her gut told her something was shifting. Across the tarmac, a black SUV pulled up to the private access gate. Elijah Franklin had arrived. The SUV eased to a stop outside Gate 3's restricted entrance. The door opened, and Elijah Franklin stepped out. Not in a tailored suit, not flanked by lawyers or media. Just in a plain white button-down shirt, sleeves rolled to the forearms and dark slacks. No tie, no badge, no entourage. To the untrained eye, he looked like any other business traveler arriving late for a meeting. But his presence shifted the air around him, quiet and steady like a storm front approaching without thunder. The security guard at the access point glanced at his face and instinctively stepped aside. "Elijah Franklin," he said simply. The gate agent nodded and opened the door to the jet bridge without a word. Inside the aircraft, Samantha Green was resetting glasses at the front galley. She didn't see him at first. Neither did Brian Walker, who had returned to the cockpit to complete pre-departure checks. The energy in the cabin had relaxed. No one was shouting, no one was standing. Just an 11-year-old boy sitting alone near the emergency exit, back straight, eyes focused ahead. But not everyone had moved on. In row 3B, Jordan Mace adjusted his phone slightly on the fold-down tray. He was still recording, not because he wanted views, but because he had seen this pattern before. The casual dismissal, the authoritative smirk, the child being silenced by rules that bent without notice. A freelance journalist with a small but loyal following, Jordan had boarded early, planning to review the airline's premium seating. Instead, he'd caught the entire interaction. The dismissal, the refusal to scan the ticket, the moment the boy stood and said nothing but moved anyway. Without identifying anyone by name, Jordan had gone live. Not with commentary, just with the footage. His screen now showed hundreds of real-time viewers. Comments poured in. Why was he moved? He showed the pass. Someone stopped this. But Jordan said nothing. He knew when silence did more than speaking. He was waiting to see what the system would do when confronted with its reflection. And then, the door at the front of the cabin hissed open. Elijah stepped in slowly. He didn't rush, didn't scan the cabin for his son. He already knew where Noah was. He walked down the aisle with a calm, practiced gait, pausing only briefly as passengers turned one by one. Some recognized him, not from fame, but from posture, from presence. Rosa Delgado sat up straighter in 2C. The man in 4D lowered his phone. Even Samantha, upon glancing up, stiffened. "Sir," she began, voice carefully neutral. "Passengers aren't allowed." "I'm not here as a passenger," Elijah said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a silver laminate badge. One glance from Samantha and her words caught in her throat. "Mr. Franklin?" she said softly, tone shifting. He nodded. "Your crew removed my son from his confirmed seat. I'd like to know why." Samantha opened her mouth, closed it, reopened it. "We were following protocol for unaccompanied minors." "No," Elijah interrupted. "You ignored the override. You dismissed the pass. You didn't even scan it." Brian Walker stepped out from the cockpit, hearing the rising tension. "Sir, if we can just take this off the aircraft." "You moved a child," Elijah said, voice still low. "From a confirmed seat in first class to an exit row, reserved for adults only, without verifying your decision." The cabin had gone silent. Even the baby in row 7 had stopped fussing. All eyes were on him now. From his seat, Jordan Mace tapped the screen and zoomed in slightly, not for drama, but for clarity. Elijah turned slightly, addressing no one in particular. If this was about policy, then why didn't you follow it? If this was about safety, then why didn't you check the facts? And if this was about comfort, whose comfort was more important than his? He turned and met Brian's eyes directly. I'm not here to threaten. I'm here to ask one question. Would you have done the same if his skin was a different color? Silence. Rosa Delgado stood up slowly. Her voice, though shaky, was clear. I saw it too, she said. He showed his ticket. She never looked. None of us said anything. I didn't say anything. Another passenger cleared his throat. He was respectful, calm. We watched it happen. Samantha took a small step back. Elijah continued. I don't need you to lose your job. I need you to understand your job. Your decisions today weren't about airline policy. They were about perception. Jordan Mace's phone lit up with a surge of reactions. The feed now had over 3,000 viewers. One wrote, "This is how you dismantle bias, quietly, directly, and publicly." Brian Walker raised his hand slightly. We were under time pressure. You weren't under pressure, Elijah said. You were under the influence of assumption. He then turned his gaze toward Noah. Son, he said, voice softening, you did what I taught you. You stayed still, you stayed clear, and now I'll do the same. Noah didn't rise. He simply nodded. The look in his eyes said everything. Elijah turned back to Samantha and Brian. You'll reinstate his seat. You'll issue an apology, and then you'll explain to your company and the public why you acted before you checked. Jordan ended the stream right then, not because the moment was over, but because it had just begun. Samantha Green stood frozen, her hands lightly clasped in front of her apron, the faint glimmer of sweat starting to break across her brow. The murmurs in the cabin had grown heavier, weighted not with noise, but with judgment. She kept her voice low and her smile thin, trying to stay calm. Mr. Franklin, she began again. Her tone dipped in diplomacy. I understand this situation has upset you, but I assure you there was no malicious intent. We were following the best guidance available. You mean the guidance you didn't bother to verify? Elijah asked evenly. Samantha hesitated. In high-pressure boarding scenarios, we're trained to prioritize flow. Unaccompanied minors typically sit in first class when they have a valid, pre-cleared seat booked by the VIP desk and flagged by executive override. Elijah finished for her. You didn't follow training. You followed a hunch. From seat 2C, Rosa Delgado gave a soft, audible, like someone witnessing a truth long overdue. Her eyes locked on Samantha with quiet disappointment. Brian Walker shifted beside the cockpit door, arms now crossed. He leaned slightly against the fuselage wall, eyes narrowing, but staying quiet, letting Samantha take the heat. But it wasn't going to stay that way. Erica Williams reappeared at the cabin entrance, tablet in hand, expression tight. She gave Elijah a brief nod, then turned toward Samantha and Brian. I've pulled the personnel archive, she said flatly. There's a record, internal only. 3 years ago, Samantha Green was named in a guest conduct complaint for discriminatory behavior on a regional connector flight. Samantha's eyes widened. That case was dismissed, she snapped. No, Erica corrected, her voice controlled. It was sealed, pending mediation. That's not the same thing. Passengers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Some didn't understand all the words, but they felt the weight of them. Rosa Delgado raised her brows. The man in 3A let out a slow, intentional breath. Jordan Mace, the journalist, though his phone was off, scribbled notes on the back of his ticket stub. He recognized a breaking story when it walked on 2 legs in a pressed uniform and a nervous smile. Elijah turned toward Samantha again. What else haven't you said? She swallowed. That matter was resolved years ago. It's not relevant. It's relevant if you keep repeating the same behavior, he replied sharply. A pause. Then, almost as if on cue, another thread unraveled. Erica looked at her tablet again, her lips tightening. "Brian Walker," she said. "First officer, your profile includes a personal reference in your initial onboarding, endorsed by Everett Communications, Liberty Holdings. Is that correct?" Brian's jaw twitched. "Yes, that's our parent company." "Your cousin," Erica continued, "is Miles Everett, Strategic Director for Liberty Wings." A long silence followed. It wasn't illegal. It wasn't even explicitly unethical. But in the context of what had just happened, it smelled like rot beneath polished marble. "So, you were comfortable backing Samantha's judgment," Elijah said, turning slowly to Brian. "Because no matter how this went, your family name would cushion the blow." Brian stepped forward, defensive now. "I didn't think the boy was unsafe. You didn't think at all," Elijah cut in. "You assumed. You backed a flawed call because it was easier than checking the facts. And when that assumption was challenged, you buried it under procedure." Brian's face reddened. "It's not like that." "Then tell me what it's like," Elijah replied. The plane had gone utterly silent. In 3B, Jordan was scribbling now with purpose. He couldn't live stream again. It would reveal too much too fast. But this needed context. Layers. Because this wasn't just a moment anymore. It was a map of power and protection, of prejudice made institutional and invisible. Erica spoke again, this time not looking at anyone in particular. "There's a culture problem here. The overrides exist to prevent exactly this kind of situation. But if people at the top ignore them, or worse, feel protected when they do, then the system isn't broken. It's complicit." Samantha shifted on her feet. "This is all getting blown out of proportion." Elijah's voice lowered. "No, what you did to my son is exactly the proportion. You saw a black child in first class and decided something was wrong, not based on his behavior, not on any red flag, but on your discomfort. You wrapped that instinct in policy and you moved him, silently, confidently." He paused. "That's not just bias. That's trained behavior." Brian's eyes darted around the cabin. He seemed less sure now, as if realizing that his usual defense, the layers of corporate anonymity, weren't going to shield him here. Elijah stepped back, his gaze sweeping the entire front cabin. "This isn't about one flight," he said. "It's about how many other people you've done this to who didn't have a parent who knew where to look, who didn't know how to push back." Samantha looked down. For the first time, her facade cracked. A small gesture, just a shift of her hands, but it betrayed the pressure she felt. And that's when it hit the passengers. The twist wasn't that these people had made a bad call. It was that they were protected, empowered, reassured that no matter the fallout, someone behind the curtain would mop it up. Jordan Mace didn't need to embellish anything. He just needed to keep writing. He knew this story would write itself. Elijah folded his arms, his tone final. "My son doesn't need your apology. He needs your accountability." The cabin was still. Not the soft, relaxed kind of stillness, but the kind that comes right before something breaks. The passengers had stopped pretending to scroll their phones. The air was thicker now, pressurized not by altitude, but by silence. Elijah Franklin stood just inside the front of the aircraft. He hadn't flashed a badge. He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't threatened anyone. He didn't need to. He just stood there. Samantha Green looked away first. Her hand twitched toward her collar, a reflex, like straightening something invisible might restore control. Brian Walker, still near the cockpit, stiffened but said nothing. He'd already learned that words were now liabilities. Elijah's eyes moved across both of them, slowly, deliberately, not with anger, but with recognition. Like a teacher returning to a school after years away, only to find the same bad habits left unchecked. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small black recording device, compact, unassuming. He pressed play. The audio crackled for half a second before a voice, Brian's voice, came through clearly. Move the kid to the back. Don't ask questions." The words hung in the cabin like smoke. Instant. Undeniable. Elijah let the silence stretch after the recording ended. He didn't speak right away. He just looked at Brian, and then at Samantha, letting their own discomfort speak louder than anything he could say. "I knew I wasn't crazy," Rosa Delgado muttered in 2C. Passengers murmured. A woman in 1D pulled out her phone and began typing. The ripple was spreading. Elijah finally spoke. "This isn't about a seat. This is about authority used without accountability. You didn't follow policy. You followed assumption. And when questioned, you hid behind the uniform." Samantha took a step forward. "That was never my—" "Stop," Elijah said. Just one word. Quiet. But it snapped through the air like a command. He turned slightly toward the rest of the cabin. "Some of you know who I am. Some don't. My name is Elijah Franklin. I served as the Chief Ethics Counsel for Liberty Wings from 2010 to 2015. I helped write the anti-bias protocols that govern crew discretion. I designed the override verification system for unaccompanied minors. I was the one who insisted that VIP clearance should never be ignored based on age, appearance, or comfort of other passengers." He let that sink in. "And today, my son, Noah Franklin, was removed from a verified executive-approved seat because 2 employees chose instinct over integrity." He paused, then turned back to Samantha. "I know the training you received. I know the checklist you ignored. I know the policy you used to shield yourself after you acted." Brian stepped forward now, his tone almost pleading. "You don't understand the pressure. We're told to keep the cabin moving, to avoid confrontation. And yet," Elijah interrupted, "you chose confrontation with a child instead of verifying his credentials." Brian faltered. "It was a mistake." "No," Elijah said, voice still calm. "It was a pattern." He stepped down the aisle slowly, toward his son. Noah looked up from his seat, eyes steady. No tears, no questions. Just that same quiet strength Elijah had taught him to hold on to when the world bent against him. Elijah stood beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "I want everyone here to understand something," he said to the cabin. "Privilege isn't just about where you sit. It's about whose word is believed without proof, about whose presence is challenged without reason." He faced the crew once more. "I didn't come here to file a complaint. I came to see whether the system I helped build would stand on its own." A beat. "And now, I know." The words weren't dramatic. They weren't loud. But the chill they left behind moved through the rows like a sudden shift in cabin pressure. From near the rear, a young flight attendant stepped forward. She looked barely out of training. Fresh uniform, trembling hands. She spoke just loud enough. "Sir," she said, "I read your ethics manual in training. It's actually why I joined this airline." Elijah met her gaze. "Then make sure it doesn't collect dust." Jordan Mace, now holding a notebook in one hand and his phone in the other, whispered to himself, "This isn't a story. It's a reckoning." Samantha finally spoke again, voice brittle. "What do you want from us?" Elijah looked at her without flinching. "I want what you denied my son. Accountability, not assumption." Brian lowered his gaze. Samantha said nothing. Noah stood then, quietly, and walked back up the aisle toward 2A. No one stopped him. No one questioned him. He sat down, adjusted his seatbelt, and folded his hands again. Elijah gave him a small nod, then turned back to the crew. "I'll be contacting the board," he said. "And this time, I'm not writing the policy. I'm enforcing it." He didn't wait for a reply. He simply returned to the jet bridge, the door hissing closed behind him. For the first time in that cabin, no one wondered if the boy belonged in first class. They wondered why it took so long for someone to notice he always had. For a moment, after Elijah Franklin stepped off the plane, silence returned. But this time, it didn't feel like fear. It felt like a pause before something larger. The quiet wasn't about tension anymore. It was about truth building behind sealed lips. ready to be let out. Noah sat back in seat 2A, not triumphant, not smug, just steady, as if he belonged there all along and had never left. His small hands gripped the armrests lightly, his face forward, eyes on nothing and everything at once. Then, from across the aisle, Rosa Delgado slowly stood. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't wave her arms. But when she spoke, the sound cut through the air like a whistle slicing a dense fog. "I saw everything," she said clearly. Heads turned toward her. Samantha froze. "I watched as that boy showed his ticket," Rosa continued, voice trembling with age and truth. "I saw her ignore it. I saw her call someone instead of verifying. I said nothing. I sat here thinking maybe it wasn't my place, maybe I misunderstood, but now I know I didn't." She looked down at Noah, then back to Samantha. He was calm. He was polite. He did nothing wrong. In row 4D, a man in a brown overcoat rose next. His voice was deeper, worn with decades. "My name is George Monroe," he said. "Retired air traffic controller. 42 years on the tarmac." That boy showed proper clearance. I recognized the code on his pass. Gold V. "That's not a regular ticket, that's an override." He looked to Samantha and Brian, eyes narrow. "You knew what it meant. Or you should have." Samantha opened her mouth, but no sound came. Brian rubbed the back of his neck. Then another sound broke the tension. Soft footsteps. From the back galley, a younger flight attendant stepped forward. Her name tag read Denise. Her posture was rigid at first, hands fidgeting slightly. But her voice, when it came, was steady. "I'm sorry," she said, "but I need to say something." All eyes shifted. "I've worked with Samantha on 3 different flights," Denise began. "And this isn't the first time." Samantha turned sharply. "Denise." "No," Denise said, louder now. "I stayed quiet too long." The cabin stilled again. "There was a man, Middle Eastern, I think, last spring. He was in business class. Samantha flagged him random and had security check his bag twice. He had done nothing, we all knew it, but no one said anything." She swallowed, gathering breath. "And 2 months ago, she moved a teen girl from seat 1B to the very back. The girl was Latina. I asked why. Samantha said the seat was needed for an upgrade, but no one ever came. She just didn't want her up front." Samantha's face turned pale. Passengers stared now, no longer hesitant. The shape of something bigger was coming into view, not a mistake, but a pattern. Not a misunderstanding, but a method. Denise continued. "I was told if I kept asking questions, I wouldn't get senior assignments. I needed the work. I shut up. But now, seeing this boy, I can't keep doing it." Her voice cracked, but not from weakness, from release. "I'm sorry," she said, looking at Noah. "I should have spoken up sooner." Noah didn't reply. He just looked at her, really looked, and nodded once. In row 3B, Jordan Mace stopped writing. He simply set down his pen and exhaled. This wasn't just a moment anymore. It was a movement. The truth wasn't trickling. It was breaking. Behind Denise, another voice added in. "About time," someone muttered. It was the man from 1A, a frequent flyer who had seen his share of privilege and prejudice. "We've all seen it. We've all looked away." The murmurs became stronger. Passengers nodded. Others shifted, glanced toward Samantha and Brian, not with fear or anger, but with clarity. The veil was lifting. Rosa Delgado stepped closer to Noah. "I came from a place where we were told to keep our heads down, but I raised 4 grandsons, and every time I see someone try to put a kid back in a corner where he doesn't belong, I remember, silence doesn't protect anyone. It just delays the truth." She placed a wrinkled hand on Noah's shoulder and looked at Samantha one last time. "Your badge doesn't protect you now. The truth does." Noah turned his face to the window. Outside, the sun had shifted. The runway shimmered under morning light, and for the first time in that long hour, it didn't feel like a runway at all. It felt like a beginning. In the front galley, Samantha didn't move. Her face was blank, but her eyes told a different story, one of a mask slipping after too long being worn. Brian finally took a seat near the cockpit. For once, he didn't argue. In the back, Denise returned to her post, but with a new weight lifted. One by one, passengers sat back down. No announcement had been made. No press release had been issued. But something had changed. Justice hadn't landed yet, but it had boarded. The cabin door remained open, the jet bridge still connected like an umbilical cord between truth and consequence. The tension didn't need volume anymore. It had matured, no longer sharp, but steady and impossible to ignore. The kind of silence that follows not from fear, but from realization. Erica Williams stepped onto the aircraft again, her expression professional, but her posture firmer. Behind her stood two uniformed ground agents, not security, not law enforcement, just protocol enforcers. Silent symbols that something official was happening. "Samantha Green, Brian Walker," she announced quietly. "You're being asked to step off the aircraft. Effective immediately." Samantha blinked. "On what grounds?" "Internal review," Erica replied. "Pending investigation." Brian glanced at Samantha, then at the agents. "This is absurd," he muttered. "You have the right to appeal through HR," Erica added, her voice even. "But right now, the directive is to remove you both from service for this flight." Passengers didn't cheer. They didn't clap. This wasn't a movie. This was accountability in its rawest form. Quiet, serious, and long overdue. Samantha hesitated. Her hand hovered over the beverage tray as if grabbing it would somehow anchor her to the cabin. Then she stepped back, smoothing the front of her blouse. She turned once toward Noah, then quickly looked away. The weight of her choices clung to her heels as she walked out, each step heavier than the last. Brian followed, jaw clenched, eyes forward. No arguments, no denial. Just the slow trudge of a man whose armor had cracked. As the door hissed closed behind them, a collective exhale spread through the cabin. Elijah Franklin didn't speak right away. He stood near seat 1A, arms crossed loosely, eyes sweeping across the passengers. He didn't gloat. He didn't raise his voice. He just existed in the space like a wall finally built between injustice and repeat offense. Then, from midway through the cabin, a hand rose. It belonged to a woman with a soft face, maybe mid-40s, holding a weathered book in one hand and a photo in the other. She stood slowly, clearing her throat. "My name is Claire Timmons," she said, voice a little shaky. "And I wasn't planning to speak, but now I have to." All attention turned to her. "Last year," she continued, "my son Ezra was on a flight to Denver, alone, just like Noah. He's autistic, very quiet, very kind, and he was assigned a seat in the front row. When the crew saw he was unaccompanied and looked overwhelmed, they moved him to the very back. Didn't ask, didn't explain, just told him it was for his safety." Her voice cracked on the word safety. "I wasn't there. I only found out when he told me the man beside him said, 'Guess the good seats are for grown-ups, huh?'" Ezra smiled and said, "I guess so." That's all he said. And I cried for hours that night. She looked at Elijah. "Your son just went through what mine couldn't explain. And today, I saw someone finally say something." She held up the photo of Ezra. Bright eyes, a toy airplane in hand. The image hung in the cabin like a prayer. "I didn't file a complaint," Claire said softly. "I didn't want to cause trouble. But now I wish I had." Elijah gave her the gentlest of nods, not just of acknowledgement, but of solidarity. And then came another voice. "I'm with her," a man said. "My nephew, same thing. JFK to Chicago, first class, brown skin, asked to prove he wasn't mistakenly upgraded. He was 13. More murmurs. "I saw that happen once too. My niece had to change seats mid-flight. No reason given. The floodgates weren't open, but the dam had cracked and the water was moving." Noah sat still, absorbing the wave of empathy. Not pity, not attention, just shared experience. His expression hadn't changed much, but there was a softness around his eyes now, like the tightness had finally released. Erica approached Elijah and handed him a small document. Internal investigation's been initiated. Official channels open as of 20 minutes ago. Thank you, he replied. I mean it, she said, more quietly. Thank you for making this matter. Elijah looked around, at Claire, at Denise near the back, at Rosa in 2C, at passengers whose names he didn't know, but whose silence had turned into support. Then, without needing to say more, he walked toward Noah, knelt beside him, and said quietly enough that only his son could hear, You changed something today. Noah turned to him. Did I? Elijah smiled faintly. You stayed still. You stayed true. The rest followed. Back at the front, the new flight crew began resetting. A replacement co-pilot arrived. Samantha's station was now manned by Denise, eyes clear, posture taller. The captain came over the speaker moments later. Good morning, passengers of Flight 307. Thank you for your patience. We'll be departing shortly. Today's flight may have taken a bit longer to prepare, but sometimes the runway takes longer when you're moving in the right direction. The plane finally took off with a hum, the engines rising into the calm, golden air of early afternoon. But the real momentum wasn't measured in altitude. It was measured in awareness. The ripple that started in Seat 2A had made it far beyond the confines of this aircraft. By the time the wheels lifted off the ground, truth had already landed elsewhere. An hour into the flight, phones across the cabin began to buzz. Notifications lit up one by one. News alerts, push messages, social media feeds ablaze with a single story. Boy removed from first class despite clearance. Airline faces public outcry. Jordan Mace's footage, quiet and unedited, had gone viral. No music, no dramatic voiceover. Just the truth in raw sequence. Noah's calm explanation, Samantha's dismissive wave, Brian's terse command, and Elijah's silent return to his son. No anger, no yelling, just the heavy, undeniable weight of injustice captured without embellishment. Within minutes, Liberty Wing's official account had posted a statement. We are aware of an incident involving the reassignment of a minor passenger with full clearance. We deeply regret the actions taken by our staff and are launching a full internal investigation. We have suspended the crew involved and are reviewing all relevant protocols. Passengers scrolled in silence. Some read aloud in whispers. Others just watched Noah with quiet reverence, as if realizing they were part of something bigger than turbulence and timetables. Back on the ground, the story had exploded across platforms. News anchors debated it live. Experts in aviation policy were summoned to explain override clearances. Elijah Franklin's name trended for hours, not as a policymaker, but as a father who had chosen quiet defiance over loud condemnation. And yet, none of that seemed to touch Noah. He sat in his seat, headphones on, gazing out the window, not smiling, not sad, just grounded, as if this was the eye of his storm, and he'd learned how to sit through it. After the flight landed and the passengers disembarked, Elijah and Noah were met by a discreet security team, airport personnel, not press. Elijah had requested no cameras. This wasn't about performance. It was about closure. But later that evening, after hotel check-in and dinner, something unexpected arrived. Noah sat at the edge of the hotel bed, scrolling through his tablet when a new message notification popped up. From Anonymous at libertywings.com, subject, I watched you. Noah hesitated, then opened it. The email was brief. Noah, I was there in the control room when it happened. I heard the call. I didn't speak up. I should have. You didn't just make them see you. You made us see ourselves. You changed us. I hope one day we meet and I can tell you that to your face. But for now, just know it mattered. A coward trying to be braver. He read it twice, then once more. Elijah, he said quietly, His father looked up. Noah handed him the tablet. Elijah read the message, his expression unreadable, then slowly sat down beside his son. "You think it's real?" Noah asked. "I do," Elijah said. "And even if it wasn't, it still means someone's thinking differently now." Noah nodded. He didn't cry. He didn't need to. The next morning, Liberty Wings issued another statement, this one with names and titles. Effective immediately, Samantha Green and Brian Walker have been suspended pending termination review. The Director of Strategic Operations, Miles Everett, has been placed on administrative leave. An independent ethics review board is being established with external oversight, led by Elijah Franklin. They didn't try to spin it. They didn't offer excuses. They didn't use words like misunderstanding or unintentional error. They said bias. They said accountability. They said change. The media had already dubbed it the 2A case. But Elijah didn't care for labels. What mattered to him was that people were finally looking, finally listening. In the following weeks, the airline reported a spike in passenger trust scores. Training protocols were revamped. Junior employees like Denise were promoted into advisory roles. Anonymous hotlines were established for reporting discriminatory behavior, small moves, but the right ones. Noah returned to school a week later. No big scene, no parade. Just the same hallways and teachers and textbooks. But something had shifted. Kids nodded to him in the hall. Teachers gave him a second glance, not of pity, but of respect. Like they'd read the story and connected it to the boy who never bragged, never complained, just moved forward. That night, as Noah sat by his window, tablet in his lap, he scrolled back to the email. "You changed us." He whispered the words aloud, like a promise, and for the first time in days, he smiled. The days after the Liberty Wings incident didn't pass quietly. They pulsed with interviews, editorials, and open letters. But amid the media storm, Elijah Franklin remained focused, not on headlines, but on something deeper, structural, something lasting. He sat before a semicircle of federal transportation officials in Washington, D.C., not as a grieving father or a viral figure, but as a strategist, as a builder of rules. The very kind he once wrote to protect people like his son, and failed. "This isn't just about Liberty Wings," Elijah said, voice calm and deliberate. "It's about a culture of discretion unchecked by accountability, about policies that can be bypassed with a shrug, about silence that has protected the wrong people for too long." On the screen behind him was a bold title, "The Franklin Code." The room was quiet, attentive. His presentation wasn't flashy. It didn't need to be. The power was in the clarity. The Franklin Code was a new federal initiative, one Elijah had drafted in the weeks following the incident. It mandated transparent override verification systems for all U.S.-based commercial airlines, mandatory third-party reviews for all complaints involving bias or passenger mistreatment, whistleblower protections for airline staff reporting ethical violations, quarterly audits made public to track misconduct trends across companies. Elijah looked directly at the board. "If we want passengers to feel safe, we have to ensure employees aren't just trained in policy, but held accountable to it." He paused, then added, "This code wouldn't have stopped my son from being profiled, but it might have stopped the people who did it from thinking they could get away with it." A few heads nodded. One official leaned in. Another began jotting notes. After the meeting, representatives from two competing airlines approached him privately, Delta Sky Group and Atlantic Coast Airways. Both expressed interest in piloting Franklin Code protocols voluntarily, before legislation made it mandatory. That night, Elijah walked the streets of D.C. alone, beneath historic buildings and silent monuments. The Capitol dome rose like a watchful eye above him. He stopped once beneath it, not in awe, but in reflection. It was never just about one seat. Not anymore. 2 days later, a sealed letter arrived at the Franklin residence. It bore the insignia of the United States Congress. Inside was a formal invitation from Congresswoman Elaine Griggs, a representative from Illinois who had watched the footage of Flight 307 over and over. She wanted to introduce the Franklin Code into preliminary hearing, but with a special request. She wanted Noah to testify, not Elijah. Noah, your son, she wrote, represents what's possible when quiet strength meets public conscience. We don't just need policy, we need stories, and I believe the country needs to hear his. Noah read the letter without blinking. He didn't ask, "Why me?" or "What do I say?" He simply looked at his father and said, "Do you think it'll help?" Elijah nodded. "Yes, because the people in that room, they've heard statistics for years. They've heard from CEOs and analysts. But what they haven't heard is the voice of someone who sat still while the world decided he didn't belong." A week later, Noah walked into the Capitol building, suit pressed, shoes too stiff, heart steady. Inside the Ethics Subcommittee chamber, he sat beside his father and a representative from the Department of Transportation. The room was modest, but the stakes felt monumental. When it was his turn, Noah stood. He didn't read from a script. He didn't pace. He just looked straight ahead and began, "My name is Noah Franklin. I'm 11 years old. I like airplanes, science fiction books, and trail mix with extra raisins." A few chuckles broke the formality, but then his tone shifted. "I sat in seat 2A with the right ticket, but someone decided I didn't belong there, not because of rules, but because of how I looked." He paused. "They moved me because they thought I was in the wrong place. I wasn't. They were." The room was still. He continued, "My dad helped make the rules they ignored. That's not fair, but I'm not here to be mad. I'm here to say that if we don't fix how people are treated on planes, it won't just be me. It'll be every kid who's quiet, every kid who's different." Congresswoman Griggs blinked rapidly. A junior staffer beside her wiped their eyes. Noah finished with, "I think everyone should get the seat they were promised, not just because it's on a ticket, but because they earned it." The room erupted, not in applause, because applause isn't allowed during testimony, but in something better, awareness. Later that week, a photo of Noah at the microphone went viral. The caption, "The smallest passenger, the biggest shift." The congressional hearing chamber was quiet. No rustling of papers, no shifting in chairs, no clearing of throats, just breath. Held, measured, waiting. Noah Franklin stood at the podium again, small hands resting lightly on the edge, shoulders squared. A boy in a suit tailored just slightly too big, in a room tailored for those used to being heard. And yet, when he began to speak, it wasn't with the nervousness of someone seeking approval. It was with the steadiness of someone who understood exactly what needed to be said. "Respect," he began, "should not need a title to exist." The sentence dropped into the room like a pin onto polished marble. Clear, loud in its quietness. He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. Every person in the room, from the congresswoman who invited him to the aides scribbling behind their laptops, knew what he meant. It wasn't about titles like chairman or captain or first class. It was about the space a human being should be given without having to justify their right to it. "I sat in 2A, Noah continued. "I didn't ask for attention. I just followed the rules. But they didn't see a kid who followed the rules. They saw someone who didn't fit." He looked up, eyes moving from face to face. "I didn't fight. I didn't cry. I just moved when they told me to. But inside, I knew they were wrong, and that made me feel smaller than the seat they gave me." There were no interruptions, not even the flicker of a phone screen, just stillness. "My dad helped write rules to protect people," Noah said, voice calm but firm. "But rules don't matter if people don't follow them. And being a kid doesn't mean I don't notice when someone is pretending not to see me." He paused, his gaze steady. "I don't want apologies. I want people to look harder, to think longer before they act, to stop letting their fears make decisions for them." And then he closed with words no one had prepared for. "Respect should travel at the speed of honesty, and everyone deserves to land with their dignity intact." No applause followed. just a silence that reached deeper than any ovation could. It was the silence of grown men and women realizing they had been schooled, gently, firmly, by a boy who had found his voice in a cabin where no one had expected him to speak. Later that day, the press conference began outside the Capitol. Elijah stood beside Congresswoman Griggs as she addressed the media. "In light of today's testimony," she said, "and after consultation with community leaders, aviation experts, and several passengers from Flight 307, we are pleased to announce that the policy initiative formerly known as the Franklin Code will now bear a new name." She glanced at Elijah, then down at Noah beside him. "It will be called the Noah Principle, a name that reflects the idea that justice should not depend on power, but on presence. That fairness begins not with regulations, but with recognition." A flashbulb went off, then another. But Elijah didn't blink. Beside him, Noah looked up. "You okay with that?" Elijah asked softly. Noah nodded. "Only if they remember it's not just about me." "They will," Elijah said, "because they saw what you stood for." Within days, airline executives began issuing statements of endorsement. Several competitors voluntarily implemented Noah Principle audits, internal processes for bias assessment, seat reassignment transparency, and staff accountability. The Department of Transportation formally adopted the language into its ethics framework. Noah's quote, "Respect should not need a title to exist," was etched on a bronze plaque outside the Ethics Oversight Office entrance. Noah never asked for interviews. He turned down a feature documentary. He told one reporter, "It's not about being remembered. It's about being heard when it matters." Back in his hometown, the school library named a reading room after him, the 2A Lounge. Inside, kids could sit in oversized chairs, headphones plugged in, listening to audio stories of children around the world who stood for what was right in quiet ways. Months later, a new training module launched nationwide for all flight crew members. It was titled, "The Seat You Offer is the Respect You Show." Noah wasn't in the video. His words were. And at the end of the module, Denise, the former junior attendant who had spoken up, looked straight into the camera and said, "Flight 307 taught us that following policy isn't enough. It's how we apply it that tells the truth." She smiled, then added, "That's the Noah Principle." On the anniversary of the incident, Liberty Wings released a brief video. No dramatic edits, just a single image of Seat 2A, empty, sunlight hitting the armrest. The screen faded to black. Then came the words, "Justice doesn't need a loud voice, it just needs a seat."